Welcome to Coast. It is Friday, January the 14th. I am your host, Jon Cohen, covering the news in our nation this week from sea to shining sea. So on Tuesday, Joe Biden went on down to Georgia like a bad version of the Charlie Daniels song, and while he was down there, he drug along his worthless sidekick Kamala Harris to make a speech about supposed voter suppression in Georgia and around the country. And while speaking to a largely African-American audience in Atlanta, he decided what would be an even better idea would be to compare all Republicans to segregation-loving Confederates like George Wallace and Bull Connor and Jefferson Davis, which is kind of funny considering that all three of those men were Democrats. And the fact that Joe Biden praised George Wallace when they served in the United States Senate together. But remember, folks, this was the guy, Joe Biden, who was going to unite the country. He was going to bring us all together in harmony, holding hands and singing Kumbaya. And there's no better way to create unity than accusing 150 million Americans of being white supremacists. Well, as you can imagine, this didn't go over very well. Not only with Republicans, but with a lot of other people, even members of his own party. But as we've been saying repeatedly on the program, this should come as a shock to no one, because Joe Biden is truly the embodiment of the cliche, as useless as tits on a bull. And don't take my word for it. A new poll from Quinnipiac came out showing that Joe Biden's approval numbers are at 35% amongst registered voters and 33% overall. 33%. This level of failure is truly astonishing. Well, it wouldn't be failure in the Democratic Party without accusing Republicans of being no good, very bad racists. Because remember, the Democratic Party playbook these days basically consists of 2 pages. Page 1, it's okay if we break the rules to get what we want. And page 2, everyone's a racist who isn't drinking the crap-colored, flavored Kool-Aid we're serving up daily. Here is the future of your esteemed Democratic Party, Hakeem Jeffries, saying as much.
Oppression epidemic that has been unleashed by the radical right is unacceptable, unreasonable, unfathomable, unconscionable, and un-American.
Can we please throw in a few more bulls in there? I mean, I need just 1 or 2 more. I mean, Jesus, man, just say what you want to say and don't use 57 words to convey what one word would suffice for. But he continues on.
By any means necessary, including reforming a filibuster rule that is dripping in racist history in defense of slavery and Jim Crow.
I swear, they literally have nothing else in their playbook to go to. Everything's racist. Everything's Jim Crow. Everything's about slavery. I mean, my God. People are just sick and tired of hearing this. And I have to say, if this guy is the supposed scion of Nancy Pelosi once she gets ousted in November as Speaker, then God help the Democrats. He's just terrible. And of course, it wouldn't be a complete bowl of odoriferous dung salad without lying Chuck Schumer inserting his 2 cents.
Insurrectionists is now motivating these state legislatures to do dastardly things. This idea that there is no change or that this isn't voter suppression. They tried to have one voting place in the whole county of Milwaukee, 1 million people. They're telling people that in Georgia, where there are much longer lines in African-American precincts than in white precincts, that it's a crime to serve water
No, it's not.
Or a sandwich. Greatly restricting or eliminating early voting, saying only one early voting place in an entire county where you'd have to travel 20.
Dastardly things. Oh, the Republicans are so dastardly. And my God, what is the obsession with Democrats over the water thing? We reported on this in Wednesday's podcast. The law in Georgia doesn't forbid people from drinking water or eating. It just prevents partisan groups representing candidates running in the election from giving water out as a means of influencing votes. Democrats and Republicans. What, are the Democrats supposedly the only ones who get thirsty in line? And we even reported also that poll workers, according to the new act, can provide water. And here's a revolutionary idea. Bring a damn water bottle with you while you wait to vote if you're going to get thirsty. I mean, the minute crap which Democrats obsess over is truly mind-bending. But again, it's not about water or drop boxes or voting hours. It's about sucking. Seriously. It's about Joe Biden having the Shitus touch, as I like to call it. Not the Midas touch, where everything you touch turns to gold, but the Shitus touch, where everything you touch turns to, you get it. And that's why we play these asinine games. And the games are as old as Joe Biden being in politics, which is sometime between the Mayflower Compact and the French and Indian War. Here's Mitch McConnell calling his former colleague Joe Biden out on these shenanigans.
Compared, listen to this, a bipartisan majority of senators to literal traitors. How profoundly unpresidential. Look, I've known, liked, and personally respected Joe Biden for many years. I did not recognize the man at the podium yesterday.
Okay, well, if you've known Joe Biden for more than 17 seconds, you should recognize Joe Biden for what he is. And in the case of Mitch McConnell, who has known Joe Biden since bell-bottoms were a thing, he should know this is who Joe Biden really is deep down. You know, if Hakeem Jeffries is going to go on throw out a litany of adjectives and nouns to describe something, well, I'm going to do it. Joe Biden is a corrupt, old, two-faced, speak out of both sides of your mouth, useless, imbecilic nincompoop who has amassed a fortune and career by leeching off the system of being an impotent public servant. I go back to the question that I have asked so many times. I mean, it's almost rote at this point. Why are we surprised this is what we got as president? Why? I will admit that I was critical of Donald Trump at times during his presidency. I was. I didn't like some of the rhetoric, especially after Charlottesville. But then I looked to the horizon, and I saw the potential for President Cream of Wheat. And at that point, it was a no-brainer who would get my vote in 2020. And it certainly was not the zombie currently occupying the White House. I was guillotined by Democrat friends when I gave them the prognostication of everything that has come to pass. I told them he would capitulate to the far left of the party. I knew this is what we'd get. And Biden at 33% has not disappointed. And if you think that all the colorful adjectives and nouns I used to describe Joe Biden are irrelevant, and if there is still doubt in your mind that he's not a corrupt old politician, then just listen to what he said about the filibuster. You know that thing he wants to destroy now that's so evil and corrupt and racist? Listen to what he said about it during the 2020 campaign.
Filibuster is a very dangerous thing to do because it's been used by progressives our whole time to make sure that we did not get rolled over.
So ending the filibuster was a bad idea back then, but now it's a great idea. I mean, it's like the greatest thing ever. I mean, we've got to do it. I mean, it is incumbent upon us to get rid of the filibuster. And Joe Biden wonders why his approval numbers are lower than the IQ of a chimpanzee. And forget about his supposed morality and grandpa-like kindness, which he was elected on. Joe Biden is an opportunistic schmuck. Case in point. He is the guy who called Mitt Romney, the nice Mormon who should be on the cover of Family magazine. Joe Biden called him a racist and said Romney wanted to put black people in chains. Well, here's Mitt Romney speaking about the ridiculousness of Joe Biden's speech in Atlanta this week.
The goal of some Republicans is to, quote, turn the will of the voters into a mere suggestion. And so President Biden goes down the same tragic road taken by President Trump, casting doubt on the reliability of American elections.
And he's 100% correct. Joe Biden can't even unify his own party. The divisiveness this guy has created by being abysmally bad at his job is why people like Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin are siding with Republicans, and why even people like Dick Durbin, who is as radically liberal as liberal gets, even castigated this guy this week in an interview, saying, that he went too far. Man, when Dick Durbin would be friends with a duck-billed platypus if it voted Democrat. So you know you reek of failure when this guy is calling you out on television. But remember, we wanted this America. We were so desperate to segregate ourselves from the mean, bad orange man who sent out evil tweets that we got this geriatric nightmare. And while I may have not liked everything Donald Trump said, you know what I did like? Not paying 20% more at the grocery store for meat, or twice as much for gas or heating oil, or actually making less money than I did the year before. According to current numbers, Americans made 2% less in 2021 due to inflation. So congratulations on your wage reductions. I hope the eradication of mean tweets was worth it. This from Simon Moore over at Forbes. He writes, inflation for December in the U.S. hit a 7% annual increase, the highest rate going back to June 1982 when Reagan was U.S. president. However, there may be a problem with the Consumer Price Index inflation estimate. It could be understating rising housing costs. Unfortunately, there's some risk that rocketing housing and rental costs suggested by multiple industry sources and indices may make inflation even higher than the 7% annual increase reported for December 2021. That's because the CPI index has housing costs rising just 4%, whereas industry sources see prices up as much as 20%, a major difference. And I'm in Florida right now, where I will tell you, housing prices are just astronomical. The Fed has also said it will be raising interest rates 4 times this year. Originally, it was 3 times, but now 4, because inflation has just gotten that far out of control. But Joe Biden continues to live in retirement home fantasy land, where everything is going great because unemployment is down to 3.9%. Well, here's a little tidbit of information for you. Unemployment numbers won't be staying at 3.9% when you hike interest rates 4 times in 12 months. Even Jerome Powell is telling them that this situation is untenable.
Sustainable path. Debt is not at an unsustainable level, but the path is unsustainable, meaning it's growing faster than the economy, meaningfully faster than the economy. We have to address that over time. We will address it over time. And the better way to do it is soon, and to do it in good times. Start when the economy is strong and the taxes are rolling in. Since we don't do fiscal policy, but I will say that the sustainability of the debt is something we need to get back to.
And yet you still have President Biden pushing the false narrative of COVID emergency, wanting to pump even more money into the economy through COVID relief. I mean, the last COVID relief bill we passed, only 9% of the money went to COVID relief. The other 91% went to pork barrel legislation and in a major omnibus package. But this is what happens when you keep putting Keynesian idiots in control of the economy who just pump money and pump money and pump money. And then you wonder why there's inflation, because you can't just keep throwing money into the economy. This is why Paul Volcker back in 82 had to raise interest rates, just like the Fed is getting ready to do, because the monetarist theory is such that you cannot have endless money in circulation without it having deleterious effects on the economy. And this false narrative of COVID still being a major threat, being promulgated by the Biden administration, is a major problem, especially when the fact is deaths are dropping and we're always much lower than Delta. A fact which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And by taking more people out of the workforce due to unsubstantiated COVID panic, you've exacerbated a labor shortage, which is crippling the economy. But there is some semblance of rationality regarding this COVID pandemonium-driven nonsense, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, I must pose a question to all of you. Are you tired of establishment media only providing you with one side of the story? Ready for a fresh new perspective with hard-hitting facts and truth, spliced with humor and sarcastic wit through a conservative lens? Then you have come to the right place. Coast to Coast, the conservative podcast, is available on all major podcast apps, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. You can also check us out online at Coast to Coast. That's COAST, the number 2, COAST.buzzsprout.com, and look for us soon on YouTube. Please subscribe today. So last week, the Supreme Court debated the question of whether or not the Biden administration's vaccine mandate was constitutional. And as we discussed on Wednesday, the major issue revolved around whether OSHA, as a federal agency, could impose a vaccine mandate, even though the federal government has no public health policing power. This is something reserved for the states. And in classic partisan fashion on the court, the liberal justices Kagan, Breyer, and especially Sotomayor said they couldn't understand why the federal government wouldn't have such authority, because the Constitution, to them, is something you frame and hang over your toilet. And the conservative justices were like, well, if we granted this authority to OSHA, where does the slippery slope end? And the mandate, thankfully, was rejected 6 votes to 3. This from David Savage over at the LA Times. The Supreme Court on Thursday blocked President Biden's plan to require that most workers be vaccinated against COVID-19 or undergo weekly testing. But the justices, in a separate decision, upheld a smaller and more targeted regulation that will require voters in hospitals and nursing facilities to be vaccinated. This rule, once put into effect, is expected to cover about 17 million people working in healthcare, the administration said. In blocking the broader workplace rule, the court's conservative majority agreed with Republican state attorneys who contended the president had overstepped his authority by requiring workers in companies and agencies with more than 100 employees to be vaccinated or tested regularly. There were exemptions for those who worked outdoors or at home or had medical or religious objections. The vote was 6-3. Biden's rule was based on the Occupational Safety Health Act of 1970, which protects employees from toxins and other dangers in the workplace. The justices said it does not go so far as to authorize mandatory vaccinations. In an unsigned opinion, the court's conservatives said it is telling that OSHA, in its half-century of existence, has never before adopted a broad public health regulation of this kind, addressing a threat that is untethered in any causal sense from the workplace. Although Congress has indisputably given OSHA the power to regulate occupational dangers, it has not given that agency the power to regulate public health more broadly. Requiring the vaccination of 84 million Americans selected simply because they work for employers with more than 100 employees certainly falls in the latter category, end of quote. The 3 liberal justices dissented. They said the decision, quote, stymies the federal government's ability to counter the unparalleled threat that COVID-19 poses to our nation's workers, acting outside of its competence and without legal basis. The court displaces the judgments of the government officials given the responsibility to respond to workplace health emergencies, end of quote. So that was the court's decision, and a good decision, I believe, because the conservative justices are 100% correct. OSHA has never had this authority. It should not be given this authority. And if given this authority, where does the slippery slope of overextension of authority end? Well, meanwhile, you have Anthony Fauci saying to the American public what many of us have been saying for weeks. In fact, something that I said on the program just the other day, and that is that everyone is getting Omicron. He said, everyone is getting Omicron. Ah, yes, your venerated public health officials giving you yesterday's weather report. And it is for precisely this reason that the court saw through the preposterousness of this vaccine mandate. Because if everyone is getting it, then how is a vaccine mandate going to stop it? And if the counter-argument is that you cannot be given a choice to save your own life, you must be told how to save your own life by your esteemed federal government overlords, then where does that argument end? How far down that rabbit hole do we travel? So the reason I wanted to present you with all this, Biden's extreme statements in Georgia, his flailing approval numbers, inflation skyrocketing, and now his COVID mandate kibosh, is because every single Democrat with half a functioning cerebrum knows they are doomed if they stay on this sinking ship. Being friends with President Biden at this point is about as popular as hanging out with Ted Bundy down on the ranch. Therefore, what do we do? What do we do as the Democratic Party? Do we look to Kamala Harris? No, that would be absolutely insane. Do we prop up Pete Buttigieg? No, that would be futile. Do we look to Nancy Pelosi? No, she's as old as dirt. So what do we do? What do we do in our moment of crisis? We resurrect a fallen giant, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. Lazarus being resurrected from the grave. Mickey Rourke's acting career being brought back from the dead. We, wait for it, look to the shining beacon of hope from days of yore.
Drum roll, please. Drum roll.
Hillary Rodham Clinton. Okay. On Tuesday, Doug Schoen and Adam Stein wrote an op-ed over at the Wall Street Journal entitled Hillary Clinton's 2024 Election Comeback. And this set off a slew of responses, some calling a Clinton comeback absurd, and some entertaining the idea as plausible. This response was written by Elizabeth Elkin over at the Daily Mail. With President Joe Biden sinking approval numbers and Vice President Kamala Harris's deep unpopularity, the Democratic presidential field that was so crowded in 2020 now appears nearly bare. It's the perfect opportunity for Hillary Clinton, 74, to stage a comeback. Political commentator Joe Concha explained in an op-ed published Wednesday, Hillary Clinton always seemed to believe the mantle of, quote, first female president was her birthright, Concha wrote for The Hill. She said, as recently as this past Sunday, amid a slew of new interviews this month, that she still holds Comey accountable. I do think, but for Jim Comey and the stunt he pulled 10 days before the election, I would have won, Clinton told NBC host Willie Geist in an interview. But Clinton has been out of the political world for 5 years now, and since then, it doesn't appear Democrats have any viable rising stars in sight for the next presidential election. The Democratic bench is about as deep as the New York Jets these days, Concha wrote. Andrew Cuomo? No longer governor and thoroughly disgraced for grabbing ass. Governor Gavin Newsom. He had to spend major time and resources just to avoid being ousted in deep blue California during a recall election earlier this year. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Not even 40 years old and worthless. And he has a supply chain crisis on his resume. Senator Bernie Sanders, insane. Senator Elizabeth Warren, old as Methuselah. Senator Cory Booker, bland as toast. Republicans, by contrast, are mostly set on Trump. Multiple surveys of Republican voters have also shown that they overwhelmingly want him to be their 2024 candidate. Ex-Vice President Mike Pence and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis have been floated as other potential possibilities, but don't poll anywhere close to the former president. So, in reading this, our initial reaction is one of laughter spliced with absurdity. Hillary versus Donald, the sequel. But, don't be too hasty to dismiss such a possibility. Elkin makes the same points in this article that we've made on the show, as have other conservative pundits. The Democratic bench is weak, indeed, very weak. And given the rate of Biden's cognitive decline, it is highly unlikely that he'll be able to make it through a second term. So, insanely enough, as it may sound, like the Dolphins bringing back Tannehill as quarterback, Hillary might be the only option for the Democrats. Even Tucker Carlson spoke at length about such a possibility. He says, I'm not trying to be cruel this Wednesday, just reading the numbers. Joe Biden is the most unpopular president that the United States has had in a very, very long time. Voters dislike Kamala Harris even more. And that's a problem, because this is supposed to be the new administration's honeymoon period. The part where everyone thinks they're great, and he's right. It's mind-boggling. Let me stop for a second. It's mind-boggling that Joe Biden was in the 60s and is now in the 30s. He continues, so it's not getting better from here. This is as beloved as the Biden administration is going to get. He continues, smart Democrats can read the numbers. They understand this, and they're working on a solution. This week, 2 of them wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal calling on the party to support Hillary Clinton for President 2024. Hillary is the best positioned candidate to win a national election, they argued. She's also, they noted, younger than Joe Biden. I mean, not by much, but she is. Former President Bill Clinton agrees with this, or says he does anyway. Bill Clinton told People magazine that his wife is the most qualified person. She's the most qualified person to run for office in my lifetime, including me. But wait a second, you say. Hillary can't win. She's yesterday's candidate. This country's got a short attention span. We want the new thing. And Hillary Clinton isn't new. She's been around forever. We're bored of her. Well, if you believe that, you don't remember Hillary Clinton very well. Call her what you will, but she's not boring. Hillary is like a box of Cracker Jacks, or your emotionally volatile niece who goes to art school. She's full of surprises. You never know what you're going to get. There are days when Hillary Clinton seems like a sensible Midwestern Methodist who grew up Republican in a suburb outside Chicago. That's the biographically accurate Hillary Clinton. But it's hardly the only Hillary Clinton. During the years she spent in Arkansas, for example, Hillary often played the loyal daughter of the American South, a Southern fried Dixie lady with a spunky feminist twist. That was the character she was portraying when we first met her 30 years ago this month. It was during the 1992 presidential primaries. That if you watch the clips, she even has a Southern accent. And Tucker has he's hit the nail on the head. Like her husband, Hillary Clinton is a master politician. She's crafty, smooth, can adapt to any situation like a chameleon. But her major issue in 2016 was no one liked her. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The only way you get beat by a reality TV star with no political experience is that you're so unlikable, people will just vote for that guy. Just like, how does a president who has had some of the best fiscal policy numbers in modern American history get ousted by a geriatric, corrupt old politician who thinks Mr. Ed is still on television? Because you become so unlikable from your mean tweets that Americans would have voted for a monkey on the moon in a condo to get rid of you. Remember, folks, being president is no longer about policy, it's about popularity. While Trump versus Clinton 2.0 may be the sequel that few want, it will probably be the sequel we inevitably get. Trump's base is as strong now as it's been in a long time, evidenced by the plethora of Trump 2024 flags I've seen in Florida the past several weeks. And the Democratic Party bench is so unbelievably weak that Clinton may be the only candidate with emotional gravitas to get voters out to the polls. Arnold Schwarzenegger was never a good actor, in my opinion, when you compare him to someone like Anthony Hopkins. But you know what he could do? Put butts in seats. He could sell movie tickets. And that's all studios in Hollywood cared about. She may be the same leopard with the same old spots, but there's one thing that is undeniable about Hillary Clinton. She still evokes emotion in people. What kind of emotion depends on which side of the aisle you fall. But make no mistake, Democrats, when given the option between a floundering geriatric and a surly but cunning politician like Clinton, well, I think we all know which option they'll go for. 2024 should be very interesting. Well, that's all we have for this week. We'll see you back here next week. I am Jon Cohen, and this has been Coast to Coast, the Conservative Podcast. Thank you.